See my beautiful new little screen. I have the number in the top corner. Isn't that cool? But apparently there was an article today that said from the Guardian, Trump basically was spewing rhetoric that could lead to voter intimidation. Now, from the headline alone, I didn't get it, and I was like, oh, whatever, that's BS. But when I was reading the article, it's basically hopping on, Trump has basically been fanning the fire, fanning the flames with that really alternative, that far right rhetoric about voter fraud, about multiple people voting 5 times. And he keeps claiming that if he loses, it'll be because of voter fraud. So what he's saying before, if you just look at like just short snippets about, rigged elections, it sounds almost kind of what many of us, Bernie supporters talked about during the primary, when we talked about issues with election fraud, right? We've seen some issues that are getting resolved right now in St. Louis, Missouri. Shout out to Bruce Franks Jr. I mentioned his case last week. He actually has won a new election. So next Friday, so if you have time between now and then, check out brucefranksjr.com, I believe is the website. Get on the phones and help Bruce win the 78th district, legislative district in Missouri. Bernie supporter, community activist, very strong guy. Definitely get out there and support. But in that case, you had issues with there were issues with the absentee ballots and envelopes. And actually today, the governor Nixon in Missouri, he actually appointed 2 new members to their board of elections in St. Louis, because 2 people on the board of elections were actually past their term. Their terms had already expired. They should no longer have been still sitting on the board. And so he appointed 2 new people today. And Bruce was quoted as saying that was a step in the right direction. But there are egregious issues, and this happens in our state houses, not specifically that issue, but oversight, other issues, misapplications of law, whether intentional or unintentional, all over the place, right? We've seen the purging of folks accidentally. We've seen egregious errors, right? So when I first saw some tweets about it this morning, I'm thinking like, well, that's already been happening. And a lot of people, if they feel that their vote doesn't matter or they shouldn't get out the vote, that's on the candidates for not actually getting out their constituencies, right? In terms of the Democratic side, Secretary Clinton has strategically, she's intentionally ignored a very clear constituency and base, right? She's actively, no matter how much progressive organizations want to say she's a progressive, no matter how much she has her little zingers, like I'm a progressive who gets things done. I don't remember who said this, so I apologize if I'm not giving you attribute for this quote, but somebody was saying that she is a progressive who seems like she's actually just catching up. Right. So she keeps saying she's a progressive who gets things done, but she's actually catching up. Right. So she has to be pushed on stuff. But then she backslides, because even just recently, she, her statement is she's for $12 minimum wage and $15 were economically feasible. I could have sworn during the election, her people, including SEIU and the rest of them, tried to convince everyone that she was fight for 15. She even said herself she had always been fight for 15, right? Yeah, now she's singing a different tune. But back to Trump and his voter intimidation, and he's feeding into this rhetoric of voter fraud. Voter fraud, again, is distinguished from election fraud when voter fraud refers to actual individual people defrauding the system, whether by voting multiple times or across jurisdictions or, not having proper paperwork, whatever the case may be. And that's actually virtually non-existent. Like there are so few actual issues of voter fraud that are ever actually found. And we've seen so many of these. So like in North Carolina, we've seen North Carolina got their hands slapped back on some of the issues with their voter ID law. North Dakota, there are, I think Texas was another place that had their hands slapped back. Wisconsin has a law that has educational. They're supposed to educate people about the new voter law, and they never did ahead of the primary. So also keep in mind, like, this is the first presidential election that we have without the protections of Section 5 of the Voters' Rights Act, right? So we have huge issues going on, and we have idiots like Donald Trump fanning the flame of, those people might start defrauding. Like, they're going to ship in people to come vote against me so I can't win. Like, this isn't a real scenario by any stretch of imagination. This never happens. But we've seen other things happen, like people taking absentee ballots but that's all anecdotal, and there is no actual evidence of actual voter fraud, right? Of individual people actually themselves doing something fraudulent in the voting process. And this is what Donald Trump is harping on. And the concern is that this type of rhetoric will either discourage or impede the possibility of people being able to engage in the political process.